In the last sections, we set up our reducers and actions. In this section, we'll set up our authcheck component, which will save our user profile data to the database. And the database is also something we set up in the previous section as well. And this authcheck component is something I actually set up in another beginner React Redux course. If you want the full details on how to set it up and how it works, just see that course. It's a free course. You don't have to pay anything to use it. And I go into great detail in that course about how this authcheck component works. But just a brief summary, it's basically a component that renders every time a user logs in and logs out. And it's an empty div, so the user doesn't see anything on the screen. It's almost like it runs in the background. And currently it's set up to update the authentication state of the user to the global Redux state. So whether a user is authenticated or not is determined and changed here. In this component, we're also saving the profile that we get back from auth0, which we're using as our authentication API. Auth0 sends us the user profile data in JSON, and here with the add profile property of dispatch to props, we save it to the Redux store. But this profile data that we get from auth0, we also want to save in our own database so we can run queries on it. So we have to create another Redux action to save this profile data in our own database. So we will do everything here. We will actually get the profile from auth0, we will save it to the database and then immediately retrieve it from the database that we just saved it in. And by retrieving it from our database, we now have access and can associate this user profile data with whatever the user does, such as making comments and making user posts. So this helps the user from, for example, having to write their username and user ID every time they make a post and comment. It's done automatically for them. So let's begin setting this up. So first, let's add a property to the map dispatch to props function called setDBProfile. And this is what will save our profile data from auth0 to our PSQL database that we have set up already. So we can set it up as a normal error function, and we need to pass in profile as the parameter and then dispatch actions.setDBProfile. And remember, setDBProfile is the action creator we have already set up in the previous sections. And we also have the opposite action, which just removes the DB profile from our Redux store. Oh, and remember to pass in profile as an argument to the setDBProfile action. We can now begin to set up our sendProfile2DB function, which is the function that will send the user profile data to our database and also retrieve it immediately afterwards, so we have it to use in our Redux store. So our function will take a parameter of profile, and we can save this in a variable called data. After that, we can make an axios.post request to /API/post/userprofile2DB. And we'll set this up on our Express server in the next section. And after the route, also declare a second argument and just pass in data. And this is the same data that we just declared on the previous line. So after saving the user profile data to the database, we also want to immediately retrieve it, because when a user first signs up for our app, they should also be logged in. And this should be done automatically. And this is how to implement it here. And if a user is already signed up and in our database, we will do nothing. And this will be handled with SQL, not over here in the React side. And of course, we'll see this when we're setting up the Express routes. So after the Axios post request, we can chain a .then statement onto it. And inside of the .then statement, we can do an arrow function with an Axios get request. And this will be another API call to our Express server, and it will be API/get/user profile from DB. But of course, we need some way to know who we're looking up in our database, and we will do that with email. So how we do this is we create an object with the params property. Then as the value, we create another object inside, and it will itself have a property called email, and then the value will be profile.profile.email. And remember, profile is the parameter we passed into the send profile to DB, and that's where we're getting our email. So we're looking up our user that we want to get from our database with their email. Then after this, we do yet another .then statement, and pay very close attention. This .then statement is calling or is chained to our Axios.get request, not our first Axios.post request. It's chained onto the second Axios request, and it's actually inside of our first .then statement. And we'll use the second .then statement to save the user profile we get from our database to our Redux store. So we already have our user profile that we're getting from auth0 saved, but we're also saving the database version of that profile as well. And this is because the database version has its own user ID property, and we can't access that property from auth0. So if we want to make user ID from the database relational to our user posts and comments, we have to use the user profile data from the database. So in our second .then statement, we can just do an arrow function with the res, which is response, and then this.props.setDBProfile, which is again just the name of the property we set in map dispatch to props. And then as a argument, we can just pass in res.data. And again, remember, res.data contains the actual JSON usable object that we need instead of the whole response object. And finally, we can just redirect the user to the home page with history.replace. And finally, we just need to call this function, which we can do in the component didMount method. And we can add it after the this.props.addProfile action creator. And remember to also pass in this.props.auth.userProfile as an argument, because this is what contains the actual user profile data from auth0. And of course, if you want a detailed explanation on how this entire authcheck object works, just see the free React Redux course on my profile page. And again, it's free. It will go over exactly how to set this authcheck component up from scratch and how it works. And in the else statement, also remember to add the remove DB profile action creator. And finally, just import Axios if you have not already done so.